In the English-speaking world, the year 1066 is permanently remembered as the year that Duke of Normandy defeated the Saxon king Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings, thereby ending hundreds of years of Germanic Anglo-Saxon rule over the lowlands of Britain and initiating an era in which England would be governed by a French-speaking aristocracy. Naturally, the Anglo-Saxon population did not simply vanish after the Norman Conquest, nor did their traditions or the Old English language they spoke. In this video, we will explore what daily existence was like for the Saxons under Norman governance, the relationship they maintained with their new Francophone overlords, and the linguistic and cultural blending between the conquered and the conqueror, which played a crucial role in forming the modern English identity. Here's one certainty: they weren't actively learning about the facts of the world, and we can state this because the knowledge available to us now simply did not exist. So, since you live in the present day, why not seize the opportunity to learn things our ancestors never could with the effective learning model from our sponsor, Imprint? This is a mobile application that offers highly visual and interactive lessons across numerous topics, with best-selling authors and Harvard professors contributing to this on-demand reservoir for the curious yet busy person. Since the lessons are typically only 2 minutes long, you can rapidly progress through subjects in between other tasks, making it an excellent alternative to mindlessly scrolling or tackling complex reading the difficult way. Close those time-wasting apps and instead dedicate 2 minutes to learning about Western philosophy with the carefully designed interactive lesson. You will be astonished by how much you can absorb through a quick session of high-quality content. There are also 15-minute guides to non-fiction books to quickly inform you on complicated subjects. Gain advanced knowledge on psychology, philosophy, business, health, history, and much more, and get it fast at the times that best suit your schedule. And even better, get it all with a discount thanks to our special offer. The first 200 people to use our Imprint link in the description will receive 20% off the annual membership cost, so act quickly. Before we delve into the core topic of our video, let us first discuss the history of the Saxons and the events leading up to the Norman Conquest. In the 5th and 6th centuries, 3 distinct Germanic tribes from northern Germany and Denmark, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes, began migrating to Britain. The Anglo-Saxon era saw Old English become the primary language in Britain, and Saxon culture spread across the land. It was around this time that the Old English epic Beowulf was composed, although the narrative likely existed in oral tradition for some time earlier. These tribes would remain fragmented into smaller groups and kingdoms until the reign of King Athelstan from 924 to 939 AD. It was Athelstan who first successfully ruled over all Anglo-Saxons, unifying them into one realm, the Kingdom of England. By this point, the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy had become the dominant power in Britain, but this status was precarious. For millennia, humans have believed that celestial objects could influence the lives and fortunes of mortals. In March 1066, Halley's Comet appeared in the skies. The great-tailed star was viewed by many as a foretelling of future events. To the Anglo-Saxons, it was a sign of misfortune. However, across the Channel to the south and east, there were other claimants to the throne. Duke William of Normandy, a cousin of King Edward, insisted that Edward had promised the throne to him, and that the newly crowned King Harold had previously promised to support his claim. In Norway, King Harald Hardrada also laid claim to the English throne, referencing his predecessor King Canute, who had been king of Denmark, Norway, and England until his death in 1035. In early September 1066, Hardrada sailed for England, pausing at the Norwegian-controlled islands of Shetland and Orkney to bolster his forces with Scottish soldiers supplied by his ally, King Malcolm III of Scotland. On the 8th of September 1066, Hardrada rendezvoused with Tostig Godmundsson at Tynemouth in northeast England. There, Hardrada initiated a campaign of looting and pillaging, defeating a small English force at the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September. When news of Harada's invasion and the English defeat at Fulford reached King Harold on the south coast, he instantly assembled his army and marched north to confront them. Harold drove his men hard, covering the distance of 185 miles in just 4 days. The opposing armies clashed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September. Harold's swiftness had caught Harada by surprise, and the ensuing battle saw the Norwegians routed and Harada killed. Nevertheless, the tide of war would soon turn against the victorious King Harold. On the 28th of September, Duke William of Normandy landed his forces at Pevensey on the south coast of England. William began burning the English estates in the south to compel Harold into a confrontation as quickly as possible, before his army could rest and reinforce. This strategy worked, and Harold marched south to meet William. The two armies met on the 14th of October, just outside the town of Hastings. Accounts of the ensuing battle vary, and many are contradictory. What is known is that sunset that day was early, at 6:24 p.m., meaning a significant portion of the battle was fought in twilight or darkness. When the sun rose the following morning, Harold lay dead on the field, supposedly killed by a Norman arrow to the eye. The reign of the last Anglo-Saxon king was over. On Christmas Day of 1066, William was crowned King of England and immortalized throughout history as William the Conqueror. The Anglo-Saxon nobility had suffered severe losses during the Norwegian and Norman invasions, leaving many fiefs without lords, which William quickly replaced with loyal Norman nobles. In many instances, the surviving family members of the former lords were married into Norman families, solidifying Norman influence within the aristocracy. However, much of the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobility would not accept the new order without resistance. By 1068, Norman rule in England was threatened by rebellions. The city of Exeter had refused to swear loyalty or pay taxes to the new king. Exeter became a hub of resistance against the Normans, with Harold's mother Gaitha taking refuge there to rally support for an uprising after sending Harold's sons to Ireland to raise an army. William gathered a force of native English furred militiamen and 500 Norman cavalrymen and marched to besiege the city, raiding smaller towns and villages suspected of supporting Exeter along the way. When the king arrived, the city maintained its defiance. William of Malmesbury, a respected historian born nearly 30 years later in 1095, recorded that men on the city's wall exposed themselves and passed gas in the direction of the king's force. During the ensuing siege, which lasted 18 days, Gaitha managed to escape by boat along the River Exe before the siege concluded with the city's conditional surrender. Exeter agreed to swear fealty to William, and in exchange would not pay the additional taxes levied after the conquest. It was also agreed that the city would be spared the looting that traditionally followed a city surrender. Elsewhere in England, Eadric the Wild, an influential Anglo-Saxon landowner in Herefordshire and Shropshire, allied himself with the Welsh princes Bladon ap Cynfyn and Rhiwallon ap Cynfyn, co-rulers of the kingdoms of Gwynedd and Powys. After an unsuccessful siege of Hereford Castle, Eadric was forced back to Wales, from where he launched multiple raids on Norman-held towns. With the help of his Welsh allies, Eadric besieged Shrewsbury Castle, which William had ordered built in 1067. The siege failed, and Eadric and his allies were defeated by William in 1069. Eadric would later submit to William. William continued to suppress rebellions in the following years, including the Harrying of the North, a harsh campaign to pacify the rebellious northern English counties that had risen in support of Edgar Atheling, the last remaining male heir to the House of Wessex and nephew of Edward the Confessor. After Gospatric, the Earl of Northumbria, rebelled and supported Edgar Atheling, William was compelled to march north to crush the rebellion.
Edgar and many of the rebellious Anglo-Saxon lords escaped to Scotland, and William replaced Gospatric with a Norman, Robert de Comines, who served as Earl of Northumbria only briefly before a new rebellion resulted in the death of him and many of his men. Edgar enlisted the support of Sweyn II, King of Denmark, who landed an army on the east coast and, aided by the rebellious Anglo-Saxon lords, captured the city of York. William's rage at this rebellion led to disaster for the native northern peasants and lords. After negotiations between the Normans and Danes, it was agreed that the invading Danish army would return to Denmark in exchange for a large payment. In the winter of 1069-1070, William conducted a scorched earth campaign to eliminate the rebel supplies and ensure no opposing army could be raised in the region. His army burned crops, barns, tools, and homesteads, killing livestock and farmers indiscriminately. The Domesday Book, a record of lands and landholdings across England and Wales completed in 1086, lists almost two-thirds of all northern estates and holdings as wasted 16 years later. An English chronicler, Orderic Vitalis, wrote in his Ecclesiastical History of England and Normandy, c. 1120s to 30s, that as many as 100,000 people died of starvation following the harrying. All Anglo-Saxon nobles in the north were replaced by Normans, cementing Norman control of the aristocracy. Edgar fled to Scotland again until William's invasion in 1072 forced him to flee yet again. However, after a 2-year stay in Flanders with another of William's enemies, Count Robert the Frisian, Edgar returned to Scotland in 1074. Finally, after an attempt to sail to France resulted in his shipwreck on the east coast of England, Edgar submitted to William. His ambition of claiming the English throne ended, although Edgar's niece, Matilda of Scotland, would eventually marry William's son, Henry, in 1100, becoming Queen of England. By 1080, nearly all the Saxon nobility had been replaced by Normans, and those who remained married into Norman families. However, some influential Saxon landowners who supported William remained as tenants-in-chief, such as Thorkel of Arden, Earl of Warwick, who would later be known by the Norman French-style name Turchel de Ardern. Norman French became the language of the royal court and the upper classes, while the lower classes continued to use Old English. One lasting example of this linguistic division is seen in our modern English words for different meats. Norman nobility would typically have eaten meat for most meals, while the lower classes were responsible for rearing the animals. Because of this, we still use the Old English origin words for the animals, such as pigs, cows, and chickens. However, we use French origin words for the meats, such as pork from porc, beef from boeuf, and poultry from poulet. Many minor Saxon landowners left England after the conquest. Many of these ended up in an unlikely place, Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Jotvarder Saga, a chronicle of Edward the Confessor's life and the Norman Conquest, describes a large-scale exodus of Anglo-Saxons in a fleet of 300 ships sailing to Mikkelgarth, a Scandinavian term for great city, referring to Constantinople, widely considered the largest and most magnificent city in Europe. The chronicle details the Saxons' exploits on their journey, including the raiding of Minorca and Majorca, and their eventual arrival in Constantinople, where they defended the city from a siege. The emperor is said to have rewarded the Saxons by granting them land to the north across the sea, in the area now known as Crimea, a land previously controlled by Byzantium. Many of the Saxons sailed to this land and conquered it from the heathens who inhabited it, establishing a colony that would become known as New England. However, it must be noted that the existence of the New England colony cannot be independently verified, and the only references we have are from chronicles written hundreds of years after the fact. What can be verified is that many Saxon exiles joined a regiment of the Byzantine army known as the Varangian Guard, which until 1066 primarily recruited from Scandinavia. King Harald Hardrada himself had been its commander after joining in 1034 while in exile from Norway. The unit served both as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor and as elite troops used in decisive moments in battle, known for their absolute loyalty and dedication to duty. In the years following 1069, many Anglo-Saxons fleeing the Normans found their way to the Varangian Guard, and by the late 1070s they constituted its most prominent ethnicity. The Varangian Guard went on to fight in several campaigns for the Byzantine emperor, including fighting against their old enemies, the Normans, when an army of northern French knights who had previously invaded southern Italy, led by the astute Duke Robert Guiscard, launched an invasion of Byzantium. Guiscard's force met a Byzantine army led by Emperor Alexius I Komnenos at the city of Dyrrhachium in 1081. During the battle, the 1,000-strong detachment of Varangians became isolated from the main army after charging Norman cavalry. The Varangians suffered heavy casualties, and survivors were forced to retreat and find shelter in a nearby church. Unfortunately for the Varangians, the pursuing Normans simply set the church alight, killing all inside. Anglo-Saxon exiles would not have another chance for vengeance against the Normans while serving the Byzantine emperor. Back in Britain, the Norman rulers had established complete control over England as well as parts of Wales and Scotland. The ruling nobles were almost exclusively Norman, speaking Norman French and following Norman customs. However, over time, a new identity and language began to emerge in the aristocracy: Anglo-Norman. With the merging of many Anglo-Saxon and Norman families through marriage, younger generations of Norman nobles represented both cultures, speaking both Anglo-Norman and Old English, and adopting some Saxon customs, such as wearing mustaches and long hair. The Anglo-Norman language diverged further from continental French, incorporating English words and styles and developing into its own distinct dialect. By 1100, the blending of Anglo-Norman French and Old English had developed into Middle English, distinct from both of its parent languages. Latin and French vocabulary and spelling became common in written English. Middle English continued to develop and became the main language of both the peasantry and the nobility, with Anglo-Norman increasingly becoming a learned second language for the aristocracy. The rising tensions between England and France during the Hundred Years' War pressured the English nobility to further embrace their English identities over their Norman ones. By the 14th century, the Norman identity had been absorbed by English, which would once again become the language of royalty in 1399, when King Henry IV became the first monarch in centuries to speak English as his mother tongue. Although Norman blood still ruled the English throne, it can be said that linguistically and culturally, the Anglo-Saxons had lived to see the end of Norman Britain. So, to provide a concise answer to the question, what happened to the Saxons after 1066? They endured and evolved, and successfully incorporated the Norman customs and language into their own. With that perspective, it might be fair to conclude that the true victors are those who came after, who experienced a culture enriched by both Anglo-Saxons and Normans. More videos on medieval English history are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing.